Thank you all for coming. Hope you guys all had a great week. Thank you for joining us again for week 2. We have, this is the week that the Testimonial start. Last week, for those that weren't here, I went over a brief overview of theology of the body. It was very brief. And then I went into singleness and the fruits of singleness, the benefits of remaining single, before we got into the details of dating, I guess. And so that was a really, I thought it was pretty good discussion, because then we discussed at our small tables, what is your view of marriage and dating? What do you see as the main problems facing young adults today as Catholics, as Christians, in the dating marketplace? And so we touched on that briefly, and looks like we kind of agreed on a lot of the problems that we see from at least the perspective of, well, how do I date as a Catholic? How do I go about finding the person I'm supposed to be with? How do I go about, discerning this? So today, just before we hear from our first couple, I'm just going to kind of just briefly show a video on interfaith dating, because I remember I mentioned that in the ads, that this is something that we kind of wanted to talk on and touch on. And so, of course, it relates to what the Krogmeiers are going to be discussing in their testimony. And then I'm going to give, I promised an ending to the story of, I gave out the story of the girl, Kate, my friend, and her fast. She fasted from dating during Lent last year. And so it just comes with a really, I kind of wish I would have asked her to make a video of the outcome, because I'm not going to be able to tell it as well as she could. But it has a very good ending, and it also relates to what we're going to hear from Jake and Megan. So before we get started, a short video from Father Mike. This is under if you ever, I think a lot of you are familiar with Father Mike Schmitz, right? So he talks really fast, faster than me. And he did a video, it was pretty recent, I think, and I think the title was, "Can Catholics Marry Non-Catholics?" And so he starts out the video saying, well, of course, Catholics can marry non-Catholics. So I edited that part out and just went straight to, well, no, it's just well, yes. But he takes forever to explain, this isn't a sin. The point is, it's not a sin to marry a non-Catholic. So then he goes into, it's not a sin issue, it's a wisdom issue. And it's something that you should think about. So I will let him take over.
In my life, really, really up front, my first year of priesthood, there were two couples. They both married in their 20 or 30 years, anniversaries. And I spoke to these two couples, 2 different occasions, completely unrelated to each other, within a space of 2 weeks. One Catholic party said, yeah, I love my husband, but and I love our kids, but if I had to do it over again, I would have married someone who's Catholic. And the other person, 2 weeks later, another couple said the exact same thing. I remember thinking both times, oh, this is awkward because your spouse is right there. But I noticed that their spouses were nodding. And they agreed and said, yeah, because marriage is hard enough. It's difficult enough to be married to someone that if you're not united in the most core area of your life, it makes it even more difficult. And so again, this is not a sin issue, but it is a wisdom issue. And because it's a wisdom issue, it means that moving forward in a relationship with someone who's not Catholic is going to mean you have to be wise. And one of the ways we're wise is if we know what's the end of marriage. What's the goal of marriage in the first place? Well, the church offers us 2 ends of marriage, or 2 reasons marriage exists. One is for the good of the couple, the good of the spouses. The other is for the procreation and education of children. So children are born and they're raised as Catholics. That's the ends of marriage. Born and raised, right? But in the Catholic context, as Catholics. So think about this. The good of the couple. Hopefully the person you're dating, or person you're considering dating, or person you're discerning marriage with is good for you, right? That hopefully they're generous and kind, and they're patient with you, and they help you become more generous and more kind and more patient. And maybe they're okay with you living out your faith. That's great. I'm totally okay with you going to Mass. I'm even sometimes okay going with you to Mass. Obviously you have some boundaries when it comes to physical intimacy, and they're okay. They're totally okay with your physical boundaries. Those are all good things. Question, wisdom. Do you want someone who is just okay with you living out your faith? Or do you want someone who's going to help you live out your faith? Do you want someone who's okay with you like practicing, following after Jesus in the Catholic Church? Or do you want someone who's going to help you follow Jesus in the Catholic Church? We know this, right? There's some days when you're like, yeah, I'm totally the strong one, and that's great, that's all I need. They're good, they're okay with it. But there's also days when you're like, oh man, I need some help. But I can't look to my partner in life for help because they're not there to help me grow. They're just okay with my growth. Is this person going to help you grow in your relationship with Jesus in the Catholic Church? Because otherwise, what's it going to be? I mean, honestly, think about this. On the shallow end, it means, okay, we go to Sunday Mass, and maybe they're okay with it right now, but what about when you're on vacation, and he or she has plans, I was going to go golfing early this morning. No, we have to go to Mass. I'm like, oh, fine. Or every time you sit there in church with them, or with her, and the priest says something stupid, because priests say stuff that's stupid sometimes, or the choir's off, or whatever, and you're just just groaning inside, and just thinking like, what are they thinking about this? You can't even enter into prayer because you're wondering what they're thinking the entire time, because they're okay with this, but they're not helping, they're not like all on board with this whole thing. Is the good of the children, or to procreate and educate, right? To have our children raised as Catholics. Now we know statistically that a lot of kids leave the faith when they turn 18, 19, 20. Those statistics are even greater when their mom and dad aren't united in their Catholic faith. But even think practically about this. And I was thinking about, I remember talking with a young woman. She was one of our students. I know that you and your brothers and sisters, when you went through your adolescent phase, you were not always super excited about going to Sunday Mass. And so your mom and dad, who were devoted Catholics, had to fight with you tooth and nail every single Sunday to get you up, to get you out the door, and get you off to Mass. Now imagine if your dad didn't care, but your mom was the faithful one. Not only would she have to fight with you to get you up and out the door and off to Mass, but this whole time she'd have to fight with her husband to get him up, to get him out the door, get him off to Mass. What happens when you introduce your spouse to the idea of like, oh, here's the reality, as Catholics we don't use contraception. So, surprise, this is going to cost you something too. Now, they can be okay with that, or they can help you grow in that. Then it's worth it to say, pump the brakes and go, would it be wise for me to be yoked with a person that we see things really differently when it comes to family, or when it comes to our finances? And when it comes to faith, that gets to be a big deal, because it is a big deal. Here's what should happen. You should communicate to your future spouse, or to the person you're dating, that, when it comes down to it, my dream would be to marry someone who I share the faith with. My dream is to marry someone who's a passionate Catholic. A ton of couples who on our campus, that's what it was. It was, one of them is passionately Catholic, the other one is either passionately evangelical, or nothing, agnostic or atheist. And over the course of the relationship, they were wise. There's such thing as rushing in, like, I don't know why you're running up that tree, I don't get it. But they've come to know who Jesus is. They've come to love the church, and they've become Catholic. And it's like one of those amazing things to see them grow, not only in their love for each other, but also to see they can totally grow in unity. But it started because the Catholic party said, here's what I would love. I'm not going to pressure you into this. I can't give you my faith. But I would love for my future spouse, whoever that is, to be united with me in loving Jesus in the Catholic Church.
Sorry, so you can tell I edited some of that, so I know there were some bad edits there. I hope you still got the point. So I just thought he brought up some really good points that, we'll discuss at the small group tables after we hear the testimony. I wanted it to end on a positive note, though, because I didn't want, because there might be somebody here that's discerning marriage with somebody who's not Catholic, and it's just something that I think you should consider, talking to them about. And I like his point about, let's just be wise about this. And let's take a step back and say, this is really important to me, and how can we grow together? Instead of just being okay with it, you want them to be, you want them to be better than okay with it. Anyways, it's a longer video, so if you really want to hear like everything he has to say, it's like 10 minutes. It's like twice as long. But again, it's under the title, Can a Catholic Marry a Non-Catholic? And he goes into other stuff too. And so finally, before we introduce our couple, the ending to the story. So for those that weren't here last week, I printed out a testimonial from a friend of mine in the Diocese of Cleveland. She prayed about it, and she decided to fast from dating last Lent, right? So this is February, March of 2017. And she just felt she wanted to grow in her relationship with the Lord, which we talked about last week. Like, that singleness is a great time to focus on you and your relationship with Christ, right? And growing in your faith with God, right? Before you start dating someone else, it's something to consider. So she felt called to do that, even though, and she says in her testimonial, like, I wasn't getting asked out like left and right. I just felt like, I think this is something that I need to do, because I'm praying about, meeting my future spouse, and it's not happening, and I think it's because I'm not right with God just yet. So she fasted from dating, and she extended it. So after Lent was over, she just decided to keep going, and she just thought, I'll just do it for the rest of the year. So she's a youth minister, and her boss is a priest, and said to her on December 29th or thereabouts after Christmas, he's like, I want to set you up with my brother. And she said, well, her thought process was, if it's not the end of the year, like, I promised God I'd fast till the end of the year, but December 29th, that's close enough. All right, I'll take a chance. And this is probably a story maybe only women can appreciate. I don't know. And if she was here, the way she tells it is so great. But let me back up for a second. She had said, it was getting to the point where she was crying in adoration a lot. She was crying in prayer, like, begging the Lord, what am I doing wrong that you're not sending me my future spouse and not meeting it, and maybe the fasting wasn't as fruitful as she thought or whatever, and I don't know if she was ready to give up, but she's like, it got harder, but she knew that it was necessary to kind of suffer a little bit, because she went on the date on December 29th, and she's like, this is it. He's the guy. Like, she met the man of her dreams, of course, right? So, and she was praying that she said, I know I'm called to be a mother. Well, he has I think she's like a 4-year-old daughter that he has from a previous relationship. They get along great. Everything's going great. It was like their third date, and she's like, I just knew, and he knew. He proposed, I want to say, like 4 months later. They're getting married in November. I'm like, only, like now that just doesn't, some of the, like, women in her life are like, really? How, are you kidding me? You go on a dating fast for less than a year, you meet somebody, and you go on one date, and it's like, it's the one. She also had a story about, the story of Saint Therese of Lisieux, when you pray to her, and then all of a sudden roses. Does anybody know the story? Okay, so there's a story. I don't know the full story, but I know there's a story about roses in there too, about Saint Therese of Lisieux. So there were all these little God signs in the end, and I saw her at a wedding reception, and she's just like, Michelle, it's just an answered prayer. But it was totally worth it. So her dating fast was obviously very fruitful, even though she couldn't see it at the time. It was very, very much like she was kind of suffering and didn't understand and kept questioning the Lord, but had faith that it would all work out, and it totally has. So that's her story. All right. So, are you guys ready?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce Jake and Megan Krogmeier. So give them a round of applause, everybody. I will just say I got their names from a parishioner. I was asking around, and I said, are there any married couples that you think would be could give a great witness? And Megan sent me just a summary of it. And I read the email, and it was just literally, I don't even know if it was maybe a paragraph, and I was like, this is the most amazing story. So,
Lower your expectations
no pressure.
Just a little now. Take what she said and give it like a 7.
Now I gotta live up to that.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Like she said, my name's Jake. This is Megan. We've been married for almost 7 years.
No, 7.
7.5. We got 4 kids.
Detail.
6 for 2 and 6 months, 7 months old. We're both converts to the faith, and when we got married, we were an interfaith couple. So we just want to share with you guys a little bit about like our history, our dating, our breakup, our dating again, and then now being married in the church. So we were both enthusiastically Catholic. We already got the prayer. So yeah, we're both enthusiastically Catholic, and try to live in a good community of Catholic people. So
Yeah, we have some great people around
that's kind of where we're at now. So, you want to talk about how we met?
Yeah, so we actually met in community college at Schoolcraft College in a not a dating class, in a speech class. So Jake was giving speeches. He had to give different speeches, and I had to do it too. And he gave a speech on how to be a romantic, and all the girls in the class were like, "Oh, well, that's right."
It's a great topic if you guys.
Then he gave a speech on
gives you a wife.
He gave a speech on how to cook and all this great. I'm like, "Oh wow, this is great. This is great." So I decided that I would like to go on a date with him, even though I've never asked anybody out in my entire life, so I was kind of nervous about it. And I decided that if he didn't ask me out by the last day of class, then I would just go out on a limb, ask him to go on a date, and if he shot me down and rejected me, I'd never have to see him again, as long as I hope so. The teacher actually ended the class 2 weeks early, and it was an 8 a.m. class. I rolled out of bed that day, and I'm like, oh no. But on the last day of class, I chased him to his car, and very, very awkwardly, really, really horribly, really bad. I'm like, do you want my number? He's like, what? And I'm like, oh, it was really horrible. Anyway, luckily he said yes. He didn't know my name, but he said yes.
Yeah, so we went out on a date, and so we started dating when we were 19. I had grown up Lutheran and wasn't practicing any form of religion at all, and Megan came from a strong Presbyterian family. Grandpa was a minister, and so she was a practicing Presbyterian. But I definitely think that if you had a secular model of like what a relationship was, that's very much what we lived, our dating relationship. We weren't too worried about chastity or really anything, but just kind of having fun together. And we dated for 2 years.
Yeah, like two and
a half years, like that. And
we're making the best choices, I would say.
You know, surprise. It wasn't healthy, right? You had two people living for themselves, but trying to live together. And that created a lot of issues. You know, I was pretty selfish when I was younger. I can still be selfish now. But I was like really focused on like myself and, you know, like my career and what I was doing, and
then so that made me act like more of a crazy girl, because I could tell he was getting a little more selfish. Anyway, long story short,
so
Jake
yeah,
broke
did.
my
it
heart.
Wasn't good. We broke up.
We did, and he was the only guy who ever broke up with me, and he broke my heart in a million pieces. Because I felt like deep down, I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to marry this guy, but I was really frustrated, and I was pretty heartbroken. It took me a good 6 months to get over it. So we kind of went about our business for about 3 years or so. We both started working. We both dated.
I don't know if you guys try to be friends with your exes.
No, I don't do that.
Terrible idea.
We didn't do that. We didn't make that mistake. No.
While we were broken up, I think we ran into each other once or twice, and we're like, oh hey.
Yeah.
And that was it. Like she took all my friends. It was like getting
they were great
divorced.
friends, and I liked them, and I
She
missed
took
them.
them all.
Yeah.
So
I didn't hate them.
I had to make new friends.
Stop. Don't feel bad for him.
Yeah, I feel bad for him. So, in the meantime, like Megan said, we both started working. She's a nurse. I'm a police officer. And at this time, we broke up like while we were 21, 22-ish. So, I started to mature a lot on my end. Being a police officer, you get to see the grittiness of the world, right? No one calls the police because they're having a great day. You know, I had a couple of big things happen in my life at work where I was seeing, you know, families being torn apart. I come from a family that's full of divorce, and like here I am, like 21 with a badge, and I'm like the divorce counselor, like walking in with a gun. Like, I'll tell you why your marriage is falling apart, people, right? Like, so you just start to like go through this cycle. For me, it was very eye-opening. I was like, oh my gosh, like I don't know what I do want someday, but I know I don't want what I grew up with, and I know I definitely don't want what I see every day. You know, like people getting stabbed by their significant other because they slept with a sister, or, you know, you see all these crazy things, right? So for me, it was a big time of maturing, and I also came into the Catholic faith at that time. I had a pretty radical conversion from some seeds that were planted years earlier, and so I went through like all this growth. And then while I was single, I also took a a fast from dating. I lost my mom while I was single. She died unexpectedly, and that kind of put me on my backside. I was like, oh, okay, now what do I do, right? Like, parents are split up. I don't have a mom. Like, I don't really know where I'm at. And I realized this was after my conversion, or kind of towards the end of it, into the faith. Like, I'm not in a good place emotionally. I'm not in a good place spiritually. And God kind of just laid it on my heart, like, you're not ready to give yourself to somebody, like, at all. You have to give yourself to me first. So I think God asked me to take a year of just being single. So guys, if you're single, take a year off. I didn't have people asking me for dates either before that. Boy, when you tell a girl that you're fasting from dating for a year to grow spiritually, nothing will make them want to date you more. I had so many women.
Are you sure?
Yeah, like, are you sure you want to, like, wait a year? So it was very funny. God does have a sense of humor, right? But I stayed committed to that, and it really allowed me to grow. I know, like, the term serial dating gets thrown out a lot. One of the terms that I like is monkey dating, or like vine dating, where he has a picture like a monkey on a vine, right? And that's his relationship, and he's dependent on it, or she, depending on your type of monkey, right? And before they let go of this vine, that relationship, they have to reach out and find another one. And then they let go of that one, and this is their new identity, right? And then they let go of that one, and then they grab another one. So, like, that's kind of how I had dated before. And it's like, why am I putting my identity into these nothing relationships? So my year had ended, and Megan and I ran into each other on a party bus.
A mutual friend's party bus, yeah. So we both finished a 12-hour shift. We're both tired. I get done this party, throw a dress on. I'm like, oh, I don't want to stay out till 4 in the morning, but okay, I'll just go to this friend's birthday party. I see Jake on the bus, and I'm like, oh, no, not this guy. Oh, why this guy? I was trapped on this bus for 8 hours or whatever.
Yeah. So we go out to, like, all these different bars, having drinks and having fun. And I tried talking to Megan, and she, like, totally blew me off. And I was like, I'll show her, right? Dang it, she's going to talk to me.
But I did miss his friends. So I was like, oh,
yeah. So she chatted up my buddy and, like, cold shouldered me. So at the end of the night, we got, like, an hour ride back. And so I made sure that I was last on the bus, so I went and just, like, bumped her over and sat down next to her. I was like, hey, how you doing? How you been? She's like, okay, great, we're stuck, right? So we started talking, and we started having, like, this amazing conversation. And I was holding my beer, and Megan had her beer, and we're kind of on the bus like this. We're just talking.
It's like 4 in the morning.
And we're, like, catching up, and it's like, oh, I see terrible things at work. And she's like, oh, my gosh, me too. And, I'm like, oh, I do this whole Jesus thing now, Catholic. And she's like, oh, that's crazy. And we talked, and it's just like this fire in her eyes, right? And I'm like, she must be into me. And she's like, hey, hold my beer for a minute. I'm like, oh, cool. So she hands me her beer, right? So now I got 2 hands full of beer, right? Yeah. She rears back and punches me right in the face. And she says, I feel so much better.
My girlfriend gave me this pep talk in the bathroom. She's like, go tell him how you feel. I was like, okay.
So she felt so
I've
much
never
better.
punched anyone. I never have ever again.
And I was like,
I didn't feel better.
At that moment, God laid it on my heart. He's like, this is the woman for you. Thanks, bro. So that was it. That was the last day in March, and my birthday was the next day. So I guilted her into letting me take her out for my birthday, and then we got engaged 4 months later.
I was like, please don't propose before summer. My parents are think we're crazy. And he's like, boom.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh no.
And so we got married a year later. So
Jake's Catholic at this point, and I'm like, what's Catholic?
Yeah,
also, like, I don't like that.
Do we have any converts in the room? Anybody else convert to Catholicism?
Oh yeah.
So, like, when you show up, man, you show up with a holy zeal. Like, you're flipping tables. They'll be like, no, you're missing out, guys. Where's that? So I was a little bit like that, right? Like, I was so excited to be Catholic, and everyone had to know about it.
And I was like, huh? Interesting.
So, but at the same time, this whole understanding very much like marriage is very difficult, right? Divorce rate shows it. Plenty of your own parents probably, your own family situations have shown it. Like, marriage is super tough. So the source and summit of our lives is Catholic. It's the Eucharist, right? So if you can't share that, like the core of what you're going to do, and a lot of what Father Mike was talking about, when things get tough, like, you got to go back to that. So for me, that was really important. And while I was dating Megan, this was something I was thinking about, because for a while I was like, man, I'm only going to date Catholics. I'm going to marry a Catholic woman. I'm going to have Catholic babies. That's what I'm going to do. and so when we started dating, it was like, well, this could be a problem. But I was praying about it a lot, and I was really trying to approach it, kind of slowly with a lot of wisdom. Like, okay, God, like, I know that, like, this is where you want me to be in this relationship, but why is that? And Megan had a quality that I thought, for a Catholic dating a Protestant, was very important. She was open to discussion. Neither of us had to be right when we talked about religion, and she was seeking the truth. So if I would say something and be like, hey, Mary's pretty sweet, you should probably check her out, she'd be like, well, why is that? Instead of, well, no, you can't pray to other people besides Jesus. Why do you need Mary? Don't worship Mary. Right? So we had, like, great conversations, and some of them came with tears, and some of them came with some frustrations.
Yeah.
And
it was actually a really tough time of life.
Yeah, like, at one point we just started emailing things. Because it was easier, right? Like, I would say something, and she'd say something, and then we'd leave, and I was like, I meant to say this, and this. She'd be like, I had these questions. And so we were, like, missing all this information. So
in the midst of that, we got married, too.
Yeah.
So,
but I was like, we're going to get her.
he felt confident enough, I think, of my being open.
No, so we were, when we were dating, I told her, like, I'm extremely passionate about my Catholic faith.
Yeah, kind of like the video.
I am going to be raising my kids Catholic.
And I was like, oh,
with
man.
the support of my spouse. And, like, you have to know that going in. This is a non-negotiable for me.
And that was a nice relief to hear how passionate he was about it. It was very attractive, the zeal that he was showing, even though I didn't understand what the truth was at that time. So after we got married, he asked me to go through RCIA just to understand his perspective and learn more about my husband's faith, and that makes a lot of sense to me. My whole intention the whole time, pretty much, although being open, was like, I'll go to this so I can learn about his faith, and then I'll convince him how to be Protestant. We can both raise our kids as Protestants. It's going to be great. We'll go back to my parents' church.
And I felt it was very important not to put pressure on her to convert.
Yeah.
So there's a joke out there that you can flirt to convert, and, like, get into a relationship and then try to convert someone later. That's a terrible idea.
I made it very clear to him that I wasn't going to convert unless I fully believed exactly what. I'm not going to convert just because we're getting married or just because we have kids or just because of all those things. So going through RCA, though, was very eye-opening. Lots of stereotypes in my head about Mary, saints. Didn't know anything really about Catholicism, anything. Not unfortunately, very fortunately, and through the grace of God, I discovered there's all this truth out there that I was just amazed, because I was on some, like, pastoral nominating committees at my old church, being Presbyterian. They kind of just vote on the truth. It's kind of interesting. Like, oh, how do we feel about gay marriage this week? Let's all raise our hands. It's kind of interesting. It's just very fluid. And so I was really attracted to the idea once I read Scott Hahn's Rome Sweet Home, and kind of, like, especially the stance on birth control, I thought was very interesting, how all the churches kind of agreed until, like, 1920. And the Catholic Church is sometimes unpopular in its beliefs, but it stands by what it says. So I was really attracted to that. So after many, many tears, and I said I wasn't going to convert at Easter Vigil, so I was kind of talking to Father John. Father John, it's almost Easter. I'm all crying every day. I don't know what to do. I still have hang-ups at this one and Mary and this. And he's like, at some point, you just got to trust. And so I converted almost a year after we got married. And it's been the best decision that I've ever made. And it's been super important for our marriage. So we were teaching Life Teen together for a little while, but we're mentoring engaged couples now that we have too many children to teach Life Teen anymore.
Yeah, and so, being the same faith now, and both being converts, like, one of the anchor points of our relationship is ministry. So, like, when we got together, we did Life Teen together, which was a ton of fun. Now we do engaged couples. like the mentoring for engaged couples. But having that touchstone together and like something that we're working on to kind of build up God's kingdom, it's huge.
That's really great.
You know, it's not hard to be unhappily married, right? I mean, especially in today's culture. If you guys are in the workforce and you have friends who are married, you know, I've got friends who, you know, we were at their wedding 2 or 3 years ago and they're already divorced, or they're headed for a divorce, or boy, they sure hate each other and maybe they should get divorced, right? There's just, it's really a battlefield out there. And I think, you know, we have our faith that grounds us together. One thing that we sink our time into is ministry together, which really solidifies us as a couple. And then we both live in like these supportive Catholic groups. So I have a men's group of like-minded Catholic men that I meet with, and like Megan supports that. So once a year I ditch her with 4 kids to spend a long weekend up north with the guys. Same thing with her women's group. Megan's got a women's group. It's full of these wonderful Catholic women. And, you know, it's really great because then you can really start to live in community with like-minded people, which is awesome because if my kids have a question about something, they can ask me. They can ask my wife. They can ask any of my good friends or any of her good friends. And I know that they're going to get a consistent answer, which, you know, the whole point, I think, the whole point of getting married is to help your spouse get to heaven, right? Like, I love her so much. I want her to get to heaven. Like, that's my job. Then you have kids, and your second whole point is to get your kids in heaven, right? Like, those are, for me, that's kind of like goal 1 and goal 2. But sharing your faith together is really something that can support that. We have a lot of friends who are in interfaith couples.
Yeah, we were actually making a list when we were writing this time. Like,
Yeah.
who else do we know who's an interfaith couple?
And the couples that we looked at, you kind of have like a dynamic, passionate Catholic.
Usually very dynamic, which is interesting.
With either a, you know, I was raised Catholic, but I don't want to go to Mass anymore, right? Like, maybe Christmas, maybe Easter, but not really interested. So they're either in a marriage where you have that, because that would be, I think, unequally yoked, right? You have someone who's dynamic in their faith and someone who's dead or dying in their faith. Or an agnostic, or somebody who's Protestant. And a lot of those relationships suffer, I think, at great cost to the person who is passionate about their faith. That's not to say, like, there's awesome Presbyterians out there, there's awesome Lutherans, non-doms. Like, you can find people who love Jesus.
They're brothers and sisters
do
in
it
Christ.
better than we do,
I like that.
for sure.
I've heard that non-doms.
Yeah, right. But, you know, it's that core, so...
It's about sharing the most important part of you with somebody.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's it? Right. Nice. I like it. All right. So normally we get you guys into small groups, and I think we still want to do that, right? To discuss, right? But I'm sure you guys have questions for them, probably. So should we do questions first? And then, okay, so let's do a little bit of Q&A with them. Small group. More Q&A to wrap up? What do you think, Karen?
I'm thinking
Longer Q&A?
short Q&A, discussions, and then kind of maybe, kind of like we did last week, with like larger group discussion and maybe more questions.
Okay,
Maybe
yeah.
come out of the-
Yeah. All right.
We're very open, so like, feel free
Yeah,
to ask.
you're not gonna
You're not going to offend
offend
us
us.
or make us squiggly.
All right.
All right, speaking of being open,
Yeah.
we had dinner together, so this is a really personal question, but
It's about
why
Star Wars.
the heck not?
Just kidding.
You talked about your friends who had like your friends who, some of them they got married 2-3 years ago, some of them are divorced, some of them are hating each other. Do you guys ever have moments like that? And if you do, what do you do to get through them?
We had one yesterday.
Yeah, so we like fought yesterday, right?
That was quite a while, but we had a good one
so
yesterday.
frustrating.
Yeah.
So,
No.
yeah, I mean, like, you got 2 people in a house, you're sharing your lives, like, there's going to be conflict. It's just the way it is. But, you know, I could come home and I could, like, disrespect Megan and be like, where's the dinner, right? And, like, whatever we're fighting about, right? And I could, like, be accusatory and rude about it, or I could take another approach and have a discussion. So one of our like biggest goals when we were dating and talking about like, hey, maybe we'll get married, is like, I shared, I never want to get divorced. Like, I do not see it as an option. It is, I'm either one of us is going to die, or both of us are going to die.
We're probably both going to die, but
we might get dead, but we're not getting divorced, right? And she was like, hey,
we both
me
felt
too.
that way. Pretty
So,
passionately, yeah.
But
it's not always easy.
Right, but like we sought out like, okay, how do we not get divorced, right? So like when we fight, how do we talk? Well, there's classes for that.
Yeah.
We went to Learning to Live in Love. We worked our pre-marriage counseling and program. Like, we worked it hard. Like, we asked questions. Megan comes from this beautiful family of like all these happily married people
family, yeah.
with like great successful kids. And so Megan sent an email like, why are you all so
I did,
happy?
all my uncles.
And why is it that you all
what
get
are we
along?
doing over here in this
Right?
family?
So
Yeah.
like we sought out people who were doing this better than we are. Because I don't know. I've never been married before. Right? So like, how would I know? So we sought out like people who have good marriages. Like, hey, what in the world are you doing? Like, tell me why it is that you are still married. And like, what do you do when it gets rough?
Because
Like,
it is going to get rough. It's never going to be always smooth all the time. It doesn't happen.
But you come up with a way. So like, when we first got married, there were definitely some bumps we had to work out. Like my pride, or like just being a proud like guy. Like if I thought she was disrespecting me, I'd lose my mind. And it wasn't like oh, I'm kind of upset. I'd be like, what are you doing? Like,
or I was like having.
Don't disrespect me. What's wrong with you? And so like I was like, okay, apparently I'm sensitive in this area. She's like, apparently you are. I'm like, there it goes again. So like, we need to work on this.
I wasn't actually yelling like it was.
No. So like we worked on it, right? Like, hey, when you do this, it makes me really upset, and I don't know why, but like, can you help me out? I don't know what you're talking about. Give me some examples.
What we teach in couple mentoring is that the family of origin stuff is huge. So like things you learn from your parents' marriage, from marriages that you've seen, you've absorbed some things that sometimes you're not always aware of.
Yeah, get into your relationship.
Yeah, so those are always good to work out for the first couple years, and we
but like we sought out answers like, why are people happy? Why aren't people happy? What's it going to take to make this work? And we got that all in line. And we said, okay, now we're ready to get married, right?
Does that answer your
Good
question?
Yeah, that was very helpful.
Okay.
I have like so many questions. I wasn't texting, by the way. I was taking notes. I hope people. I should have mentioned that. I didn't want you to think I was being rude. I love the monkey vine thing. I'm totally using that because I always use the serial dating. I used serial dating.
Trademarked.
Yeah. That was great. That's so perfect.
That's
Because that's just so perfect. There were just so many things you mentioned that I'm like, oh gosh, I really should have brought a notebook. But no, it was great. It's just so interesting. Do you ever look back at like when you first started dating? You dated two and a half years.
Yeah.
And then when you got back together, I mean,
very
I'm sure it's like night and day, right?
Very different.
Yeah, so
You have like a totally different relationship.
We're not only were we two different people, we had a different relationship. I no doubt was living for myself, for my career, for the weight room, for having a good time, and I was very self-focused and centered. Probably wouldn't have been a good partner to saddle up for marriage, right? Like, I wasn't ready. But it's again, I didn't know or care who Jesus was,
Right.
So when we dated the second time, we tried to make some we were praying together when we were dating, which was really big. That takes some practice for some people. It's a little
Who
awkward
brought that
to start
up?
with.
Like, who mentioned that? I'm so curious.
I think it was organic.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
So here's the deal, like people only expect of you what you tell them, right?
Set the bar.
So like, I've never met this guy before. What's your name? Carl. But if Carl was like, hey man, I'm Catholic, I'd be like, sweet. But if he didn't tell me he was Catholic in like a month, if he was like, hey, can I pray over you? I'd be like, Carl, you're freaking me out, man. Like, I didn't know that was you, right? So like when you first meet someone, it's a really good opportunity to be like, just have that conversation of like who you are and what you're about, right? So when we got back together, I was a different person. I knew I was. She didn't think I was a different person, and for good reason. There were plenty of evidence contrary to that. But I had an opportunity to redefine myself. So I didn't have to come in bashful about like, oh, hey, we've been together forever, you know, like maybe we should start praying together.
Yeah, he's very unapologetic.
But it was like, hey, no, like this is me now, and like I've killed and buried the old me. But like I think that we should be doing X, Y, and Z.
So they're making efforts to draw some really hard physical boundaries with each other, and also pray together. I think those are the two main.
Yeah, and I mean, like when we came back together, we were both different people, but you know, like chastity is still a very difficult thing for dating adults. So, you know, we've got very close friends who had a beautifully chaste dating and engaged relationship, and like from the other side of being married, like what a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
it is.
it's a very important thing, I think.
Yeah. So really work on it. What's that?
Why do you say that?
So there is there's something special about being able to give your whole self to someone. You know, it's like we've got kids now, and we try really hard to keep our kids innocent because there's a beauty in that. Not to say that like our relationship isn't beautiful, because it is and it's wonderful, but like that's just very special in a different way.
So you're saying
you know.
something with your body that's not true, and that
Right.
creates a host of communication errors because you're acting in one way, but you're not married.
Right.
And so, it
your
really
body's telling
breaks
a lie that your
breaks
heart
you down a little bit in
can't
certain aspects.
contain.
It's not a fun thing to feel. I don't think.
Yeah, especially when you break up.
Yeah. There goes that.
Now what? So
Good point.
Yeah, good question. Thank you.
So going off the topic, how do you know when you're at the point where you're ready to give yourself to someone?
Well, that's a great question. I think when you feel like you're right with God, I think when you feel like your spiritual life is being taken care of and you feel like you have a solid identity that stems from your relationship with the Lord. That's what I would
Yeah. So you know, for me in prayer, God told me like you are not ready for a relationship because I desired that very much. Ever since I was little, I was like, I'm gonna have me a wife and I'm gonna have me a bunch of kids and like I want a family. Like I always wanted that when I was small. And you know, just before my dating fast, like God really laid on my heart, like you are not ready for a relationship with a woman. You're not there. So you know, prayer is meant to be a two-way conversation, right? And so in just praying to God and listening, okay, God, you know, what are you trying to tell me? You know, He made it clear for me. For a while I was discerning, you know, am I supposed to get married? Am I supposed to go in the priesthood? This was another motivation for my year, my dating fast. You know, like, am I called to be a priest or am I called to be married? You know, like I know what I want. What is it that you want for me? And you know, just in prayer, God gave that to me. Like, no, you're meant to be married. You're not called to be a priest. And it's like, okay, well, if I'm meant to be married, then you know, you pick because I'm gonna mess that up.
What would you recommend for him?
So, yeah, I mean, it's just a lot of time in prayer, you know, and in adoration. You know, God speaks to us all in different ways. You know, some people get the little whisper. Some people, like, they pop open scripture and boom, there's
Imagery.
their answer. Some people see their images, you know, so figure it out how it is that, you know, you best communicate with God. Just start listening. And it takes, you know, for me, it took a long time. You know, I had a couple years before we ended up getting together. But I'm glad that, you know, God prepared me and my heart for what it was that He had for me. But it took preparation. You know,
Any other questions before we do small group? No? All right. How about at your tables? I told Karen, I'm like, I'll think of questions for them to discuss. But, I mean, no, I'm sure there's plenty to discuss at your table. I mean, there were so many things that you said that we can reflect on. Just discuss with each other, you know, what struck your heart? Was there something that they said that you had never quite thought of? I'm so glad you mentioned just the things you mentioned, because we've mentioned a lot of them last week about, you know, what you just mentioned and answered the question just now about being ready, not being ready. to be yoked to somebody because you need to get right with God first. So we talked about that last week, and so now you see an example of it and how that pays off. So maybe just in your small groups for a little bit, let's just discuss, what really resonated with you and what you can kind of learn from what they shared, and then we'll get back into the larger group to wrap up with any other questions, because I'm sure they'll probably spark some other questions and discussion, all right? And then we'll close with prayer.